A question explored since ancient Athens when Plato asked, "Why be virtuous if virtue brings no personal advantages?" still resonates today in the modern idea that the good always finish last, or in the belief that the world is a jungle where cruelty is necessary for survival. However, there have been those who dare to suggest that virtue matters, even when the world crumbles. Fyodor Dostoevsky, in The Idiot, idealized a man who is fully good, facing the chaotic and relentless Russian world. Dostoevsky aimed to portray not physical beauty but the soul of a generous, kind, and Christ-like man, a figure he deeply admired. The protagonist, Prince Mishkin, stands out for his singular innocence, not a naive kindness but a purity that sees the best in people. Traveling to St. Petersburg, he fascinates and disconcerts Rogozin, an intense and dangerous man, and Lebedev, a servile and self-serving official. By revealing his soul unreservedly, Mishkin's posture exposes the cruelties of high society. He insists on treating everyone, from the humblest servants to the most powerful nobles, with equal respect, ignoring social conventions. In this sense, his attitude resembles that of Christ, who saw the value of souls rather than appearances or status. However, as the novel progresses, it becomes clear that, no matter how pure and direct Mishkin is, he inadvertently causes discomfort and suffering. When he offers financial support to those who wish to exploit his inheritance, his kindness is seen as weakness by the nobles, who interpret his gestures as a threat to the social order. To them, such gentleness is an unacceptable imbalance. Mishkin, who should be repudiated or confronted, is instead considered an idiot or a dangerous element. His insistence on treating everyone equally makes him incapable of aligning with any group, alienating him from factions and elites. Even his kindness toward Nastasia Filipovna, motivated solely by a genuine desire to help her, seems incomprehensible to the eyes of ambitious young men. His purity, defying the logic of a cruel society, highlights how radical the idea of living as an idiot, someone who dares to be good in a world that despises goodness, truly is. Nastasia, marked by a dark past of abuse and manipulation, is seen by Ganya as an obstacle to avoid or a tool for personal gain. Mishkin, on the other hand, is often underestimated. Many consider him naive, an idealist out of place in a world that values cruelty and pragmatism. Even his initially unshakable kindness begins to erode when he realizes that his altruistic actions hardly change society. Despite this, Mishkin persists, but with growing skepticism, facing the question that consumes him by the end of the novel. Was his journey worth it? Mishkin's struggle is that of a man whose gentleness seems like a silent protest against an unjust world. His final loneliness encapsulates the doubt. Was he a courageous idealist or merely a naive man unable to see the futility of his crusade? Dostoevsky uses Mishkin to critique the values of his time, emphasizing how the pursuit of status and appearances traps the characters in self-destructive patterns. Ganya, for example, is consumed by economic ambition, torn between Nastasia, who represents an advantageous alliance, and Aglaya, his true affection. This obsession with appearances is reflected even in death. The characters feel shame not for what they did but for the fear of being seen as cowards. Dostoevsky demonstrates how this focus on reputation obscures even the clarity that should come with the proximity of death. The contrast between Mishkin and the other characters highlights his inability to play the game of appearances, which makes him seem foolish. His relationship with Nastasia is especially complex. While Ganya's love for her is self-serving and Rogozin's is violent, Mishkin offers selfless affection, seeing Nastasia as someone worthy of love despite her emotional scars. However, Nastasia rejects Mishkin and chooses Rogozin, not out of inclination but self-punishment. The abuse Nastasia suffered distorts her self-image, leading her to seek relationships that reinforce her suffering. Her choice of Rogozin reflects this dynamic. She believes she does not deserve the happiness Mishkin could offer. Freud theorized that we repeat destructive patterns because they are familiar, and this resonates in Nastasia's decision, where she confuses cruelty with inevitability. Humanity is not only brutal but ingenious in inflicting pain. Nastasia's tragedy is that of a woman denigrated even by the most compassionate. Although Mishkin tells the story of Marie, a rejected young woman in Switzerland whom he helped to be accepted, those who hear his narrative do not apply the lesson to Nastasia, preferring to relegate her to social condemnation. In the end, Mishkin's kindness challenges the norms of Russian society but also highlights its limitations. His selfless love causes both comfort and anguish, pushing Nastasia toward her tragic fate. In The Idiot, Dostoevsky explores how human cruelty and the obsession with appearances prevent true connection, leaving the question open. To what extent is goodness possible in such an imperfect world, especially for socially marginalized individuals? C.S. Lewis observed a human tendency to profess noble feelings in the abstract while keeping them as mere sentiments. Kierkegaard also highlighted the duality of mind and partially committing to our principles, abandoning them under the pressure of the majority. The members of high society live in doublethink, theoretically admiring Mishkin's humble and Christ-like approach until they realize it might harm them socially. For Dostoevsky, Christianity is not just a metaphysical doctrine but a way of life, and he severely criticizes a Christianity that exists only in theory or is used as an instrument of worldly power. The characters in the novel are not atheists, but their faith and morality are so neglected that they almost resemble atheism, showing bitter hostility to Mishkin's approach by the end. Even the kindest are unprepared for the singularity of his values. For Mishkin, these values are considered pleasant in theory but difficult in practice. Although Dostoevsky emphasizes faith and religion, he does not present them as cures for all evils. It is not atheism that oppresses Christianity but the corruption of faith that has ceased to provide brotherly love. Mishkin represents the authentic Christian, while others maintain a superficial and aesthetic version of religion. Sometimes, a positive view of ourselves makes us less aware of our cruel actions. For example, we donate to a cause and then feel morally entitled to reprimand someone, justifying our flaws while condemning others. This justified cruelty allows Aglaya and others to despise Nastasia, a victim of abuse, while considering themselves kind. They criticize actions without questioning whether the rules should change. This sophisticated cruelty arises from social structure and the human capacity to justify brutalities, not from a distortion of values but from surrendering to one's own jealousy and passions. This sophisticated cruelty arises from social structure and the human capacity to justify brutalities, not from a distortion of values but from surrendering to one's own jealousy and passions. These are impulsive decisions followed by immediate calm, without remorse or satisfaction. For Dostoevsky, Rogozin symbolizes humanity in a state of savage nature, where no values or limits contain unleashed passions. For the Russian author, Mishkin is a small spark of goodness and selflessness, much like Christ. But while Christ had the advantage of divine authority, Mishkin possesses none. Thus, his small acts of holiness are often overwhelmed by the crushing cruelty of others. The Italian statesman and thinker Niccolò Machiavelli is famous for his opinion that in politics, the ends often justify the means. In The Prince, Machiavelli often sanctions that the leader of a city-state could commit true acts of brutality, as sometimes being gentle and meek leads to even more negative results. The effects of this would not only be felt by the ruler but also by the general population. If Rogozin's actions were easily condemned, his behavior in the novel is almost entirely disastrous. He intentionally ruins Nastasia's marriage to Ganya, even though he does not love her. This marriage would have improved her social status, and it was not uncommon for couples to learn to love each other over time. When Mishkin arrives at the Yupankin family, a harmonious aristocratic union begins to cause problems with his insistent kindness and altruism, creating tensions between Aglaya and her parents. Aglaya is attracted to Mishkin but feels trapped between her desire to be with him and her family's disapproval, leading to internal conflict. Mishkin refuses to abandon Nastasia in her time of need, which causes Aglaya to reject him. She eventually runs away with someone else, converts to Catholicism, and distances herself from her family. Had Mishkin not gotten involved, Aglaya would likely have remained close to her family, married well, and enjoyed a happy life in Russian nobility. Now estranged, she becomes the last victim of it all. Mishkin himself, whose behavior ultimately leads to his loss of sanity, could be blamed for his suffering from a Machiavellian perspective. He is responsible for not recognizing that his kind of goodness is incompatible with the situation he finds himself in. Without wisdom, while others in the novel adapt their principles for convenience, he refuses to do the same, seeking to spread kindness and brotherly love without adapting to circumstances. Despite his efforts, the only thing Mishkin achieves is occasionally calming some secondary characters, but he does not resolve the main problems of others. He cannot save Nastasia from her self-destructive spiral or offer Aglaya a happy life. Instead of being a positive example for others, he only fuels the conflicts that already existed. His unwavering adherence to his principles enrages almost everyone around him. If we adopt a cynical perspective while reading The Idiot, Mishkin reveals himself as a tragic and comedic figure, someone who lives in an ideal world while ignoring reality. His sincerity is valuable but inadequate for the context he finds himself in. His lack of worldliness is not admirable but a character deficiency. His passivity, willingness to forgive, and inflexible generosity only work in a simple environment, like with children, but not in the complex adult world or the high society of St. Petersburg. In this sense, Mishkin is shown as kind but incompetent, leading to destruction. The Idiot is not just a story about the world being incapable of handling simple kindness. It is the story of a fool who cannot adapt his kindness to circumstances. It is easy to see Mishkin as an uncomplicated ideal, but in a way this is probably a bit simplistic. He is kind, innocent, gentle, and generous, but he lacks the ability to apply these qualities effectively, being entirely guided by principles in a world without them. This may offer a certain moral superiority, but if this attitude brings destruction to you and others, we must ask, is it really worth it? We are all immersed in a world where we must make decisions continuously, and without a clear way to choose between options, we would be lost without any criteria. With this in mind, the original question becomes a bit clearer. On what principles should I base my decisions? We have virtue ethicists, divine command theorists, all telling us how we should live, but ultimately, the question of ethics is not answered in a lecture hall but gradually, day by day, as we interact with the world. Sartre famously said that we are condemned to be free, but he might as well have said that we are condemned to act. Every time we make a decision, we act, affecting the world and causing consequences we must live with in our conscience. Mishkin tries to do the right thing, but it ends very badly for him and those around him. This is part of the existential agony of creating a life. We do not know in advance what the consequences of our decisions will be or whether we will be able to live with them afterward. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, has a fascinating view of ethical decisions. When making a decision, we reduce all options to a single one, a crossing that divides. Like many Danish ideas, it requires a small leap of irrational faith. When we decide to engage in a relationship, a system of principles, or a job, we deny all possibilities incompatible with it. If we were immortal, many of us might never take on any of these commitments, but the river of time closes behind us, turning possibilities into realities. This kind of story connects well with the thoughts expressed by Dostoevsky about the limits of rationality, which we repeatedly encounter in his novels. What is admirable in Dostoevsky's The Idiot is that instead of making Mishkin an idealized hero who simply believes in selfless love and universal brotherhood, he is presented in a more complex and realistic way. If Dostoevsky wanted his novel to be a mere platform for his own system of principles, he would have made Mishkin solve all the problems of those around him with his touch, like Jesus healing the leper. However, the Russian author does not pretend that a good man coming to town will solve everything. Instead, he lets people know that even if you are truly kind and selfless, things may still not go well for you. Dostoevsky's kindness, humility, and selflessness are not perfect answers to life's problems but the best we have in a world beyond our control. He does not treat human existence as a problem solved by an ethical theorem but as a great gamble. Mishkin is a clear example of this. Although he seems like an ideal figure, his kindness does not save him from being manipulated or inadvertently causing the destruction of the people he loves most. Brilliant, innocent, and pure, he still fails. Despite everything, it is important to emphasize that Mishkin is undoubtedly extraordinary, even in his failures, something worthy of honor and respect. By the end of the novel, Dostoevsky does not consider him simply a pathetic and useless idiot but a visionary, someone whose tragic goodness was not ultimately rewarded but who persisted in that goodness anyway. Dostoevsky's genius creates a character who does not guarantee that our kindness will be rewarded but allows us to make sense of any suffering we endure in the pursuit of selfless love, even when it does not work. Mishkin gave everything, his chance to love, his happiness, even his mind, in his quest for kindness and detachment. We may not have to do this, but it is characteristic of Dostoevsky to try to convince us not that being kind is in our interest but that it is worth being kind despite it all. For me, this is what The Idiot is at its core. A treatise on kindness and selflessness that conveys the idea that being either of these things may not be best for us in some situations. As we learn from the Russian author, the idiot is not a man without intelligence but a man whose innocence is so pure that, in a world full of corruption, his goodness is disconcerting and dangerous.